Welcome to the 5-Minute Warfare podcast from 5minutewarfare.com, where we dive into history's most pivotal battles and military strategies in around 5 minutes. If you enjoy the show and would like to support us, please consider buying us a coffee. Head on over to 5minutewarfare.com/coffee to see how. This is episode 20, The Cold War, Proxy Wars, and the Threat of Nuclear Annihilation. The Cold War was a tense and complex period in world history, marked by ideological rivalry, proxy conflicts, and the ever-present threat of nuclear annihilation. Spanning from the end of World War II in 1945 to the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the Cold War was not a conventional war fought on battlefields, but a geopolitical struggle between two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. This prolonged confrontation shaped global politics, economics, and culture, leaving a profound impact on the modern world. At its core, the Cold War was an ideological conflict between the capitalist democracy championed by the United States and the communist state espoused by the Soviet Union. Following the defeat of Nazi Germany, the alliance between the two nations quickly dissolved as their conflicting visions for the post-war world became apparent. The division of Europe into Western and Soviet spheres of influence was formalized through agreements such as the Yalta and Potsdam conferences. This divide was epitomized by Winston Churchill's famous description of the Iron Curtain descending across Europe. One of the defining features of the Cold War was its lack of direct military confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union. Instead, the two superpowers engaged in a series of proxy wars, supporting opposing sides in regional conflicts to extend their influence without risking an all-out nuclear war. These proxy wars were fought across the globe, from Asia and Africa to Latin America, as the two rivals sought to spread their ideologies and undermine each other's influence. The Korean War, which began in 1950, was one of the first major proxy conflicts of the Cold War. North Korea, backed by the Soviet Union, and later China, invaded South Korea, which was supported by the United States and a coalition of United Nations forces. The war ended in a stalemate, with the Korean peninsula divided along the 38th parallel, but it demonstrated the willingness of both superpowers to intervene militarily in defense of their respective ideologies. Similar dynamics played out in Vietnam, where the United States became embroiled in a costly and controversial war to prevent the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. The Vietnam War became a defining event of the Cold War era, highlighting the devastating human cost of proxy conflicts and the limits of American power. Africa and Latin America also became battlegrounds for Cold War rivalry. In Africa, newly independent nations often found themselves caught between the competing interests of the United States and the Soviet Union. The Angolan Civil War, for example, saw both superpowers providing military and financial support to opposing factions, prolonging the conflict and exacerbating its impact on the civilian population. In Latin America, the Cold War played out through covert operations and political interference, most notably in Cuba. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 brought the world to the brink of nuclear war, as the discovery of Soviet missiles on the island prompted a tense standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union. The resolution of the crisis, which saw the withdrawal of Soviet missiles in exchange for American concessions, underscored the precarious balance of power in the nuclear age. The threat of nuclear annihilation loomed large throughout the Cold War, shaping the strategies and policies of both superpowers. The development and stockpiling of nuclear weapons created a dangerous environment in which mutual destruction was a constant possibility. This doctrine of mutually assured destruction, MAD, held that neither side would launch a nuclear strike for fear of triggering a devastating retaliation. While this balance of terror may have prevented direct conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union, it also created a pervasive sense of fear and uncertainty, particularly during periods of heightened tension such as the Cuban Missile Crisis. The nuclear arms race extended beyond weapons stockpiles to include technological advancements in delivery systems, such as intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, and nuclear-powered submarines. Both superpowers also sought to gain strategic advantages through space exploration, leading to the space race. Landmark achievements, such as the Soviet Union's launch of Sputnik in 1957, and the United States Apollo 11 moon landing in 1969 were as much about demonstrating technological superiority as they were about scientific progress. The Cold War also had significant cultural and social implications. Propaganda campaigns on both sides sought to promote their respective ideologies and demonize their opponents. In the United States, anti-communist sentiment fueled the Red Scare and led to domestic policies aimed at rooting out perceived subversives, often at the expense of civil liberties. In the Soviet Union, strict control over media and education ensured that communist ideals were upheld and dissent suppressed. The cultural impact of the Cold War extended to art, literature, and film, with works such as George Orwell's 1984 and Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove reflecting the anxieties of the era. The eventual end of the Cold War came not through military victory, but through political and economic transformation. By the 1980s, the Soviet Union faced significant internal challenges, including a stagnating economy, declining morale, and increasing pressure for political reform. Under the leadership of Mikhail Gorbachev, policies such as glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring, aimed to modernize the Soviet system, but also exposed its vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, movements for democratic reform gained momentum in Eastern Europe, culminating in the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the collapse of communist regimes across the region. The dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 marked the definitive end of the Cold War, leaving the United States as the world's sole superpower. The legacy of the Cold War remains deeply embedded in global politics and society. The proxy wars and ideological divisions of the era continue to shape the geopolitical landscape, while the threat of nuclear weapons persists as a reminder of the stakes involved in the rivalry. The Cold War was a period of immense tension and complexity, defined by both the worst fears and highest aspirations of humanity. It serves as a powerful example of the potential consequences of ideological conflict and the importance of diplomacy in navigating the challenges of an interconnected world. I hope you enjoyed that episode of 5-Minute Warfare from 5minutewarfare.com. If you did, please leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts, and while you're there, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. If you would like to support us more directly, please consider buying us a coffee. Head on over to 5minutewarfare.com/coffee to see how. You may also be interested in our other 5-minute podcasts. Check them out at 5minuteproductions.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.